Science and Technology will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled A Review of Recommendations for NSF Project Management Reform. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Today, we will be reviewing recommendations made by the National Academy of Public Administration, NAPA, on how to improve National Science Foundation's management of cooperative agreements to support the development and construction of large-scale research projects. NSF and the National Science Board commissioned the study in response to concerns raised by this committee, the NSF Inspector General, and others regarding NSF's management and oversight of cooperative agreements and proper stewardship of federal funds. NAPA assembled a committee that conducted an 8-month review of NSF's practices and looked at how other science funding agencies like NASA and the Department of Energy Office of Science manage similar projects. One of our committee's most important responsibilities is to ensure that federal science agencies spend taxpayer dollars as effectively and efficiently as possible. Every dollar wasted on mismanagement is a dollar that could be spent on groundbreaking, basic research or training future scientists. Our committee has held 2 hearings over the last year on NSF's management of major projects like the National Ecological Observatory Network, NEON, and the LSST telescope. These hearings have revealed that NSF needs to do more to ensure that taxpayer funding is not wasted on mismanagement and abuse. The NAPA Study Committee has provided 13 thoughtful recommendations for NSF. I look forward to hearing testimony on those ideas. I also look forward to hearing from NSF on how the Foundation plans to respond, and from the Inspector General on her thoughts about how some of these changes could prevent problems found in past audits of cooperative agreements. Together, I hope we can work towards ensuring taxpayer dollars are well managed. American leadership in science and innovation is the key to our nation's future economic prosperity as well as our security. We want to be strong advocates for federal support of basic research that advances science in the national interest, but we can only invest more in research when taxpayers have faith and confidence that their money is being spent wisely. I thank you, and I now recognize the ranking member of the Research and Technology Subcommittee, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock. I want to thank you and Chairman Loudermilk for holding this hearing to review the recommendations for the National Science Foundation Project Management Reform. In 1995, the NSF created an agency-wide budgetary account to promote effective planning and management and foundation support for major research equipment and facilities construction, or MREFC. This account supports the acquisition, construction, and commissioning of major multi-user research facilities, which typically cost between $100 and $500 million. It may take a decade to complete from planning to the start of full operations. In the early 2000s, this committee and the scientific community raised concerns over management and oversight of the MREFC account. In response, the NSF took a number of steps to strengthen their processes and cost controls. Over the next decade, the agency shepherded through many successful projects which today remain important, cutting-edge research facilities for the scientific community. In 2010, the NSF Office of Inspector General began raising new concerns about policies and practices for awarding and managing large construction projects. Since then, this committee has held a number of oversight hearings related to the MREFC account and specific projects. During this period, disagreement arose between NSF and the OIG over what constitutes appropriate and/or necessary policies and practices, with no apparent resolution in sight. This committee proposed draft legislation, some of it on a bipartisan basis, in an effort to forge a path forward. Then, as now, I feel that while this committee's prerogative is to exercise its oversight and legislative authority, that this is very important, we must also be aware of the unintended consequences of micromanagement. Afterwards, serious structural problems were discovered with the management of the National Ecological Observatory Network, or NEON. Since the summer of 2014, and largely in response to the failures with NEON, NSF has taken a number of additional steps to strengthen its business practices. But the OIG has continued to raise red flags. Early last year, the National Science Board and NSF leadership commissioned a third-party independent review of the Foundation's use of cooperative agreements to support large projects, which would include benchmarking NSF practices against those of other agencies with large scientific facilities. The result was a report by the National Association of Public Administration that is the subject of today's hearings. By all accounts, the NAPA review is thorough, thoughtful, and balanced. The experts on the NAPA panel came down solidly in support of NSF continuing to use cooperative agreements rather than contracts to support MREFC projects. So in my view, we can probably dispense with that debate. With respect to specific cost control policies and practices, NAPA largely agreed with NSF that their policies are not inconsistent with OMB guidelines, but still urged them to implement stronger preventive cost controls. NAPA also offered several recommendations for NSF to strengthen its project management procedures across the agency and to rethink roles and responsibilities for planning, management, and oversight of MREFC projects. I understand that the IG supports the NAPA recommendations overall, but would still urge NSF to take steps above and beyond those recommended in the NAPA report. I hope we'll have a chance to discuss all this during the hearing. Before I conclude, I want to make 2 points. First, I'm hopeful that this report will serve not just to strengthen NSF's business practices for large projects, but also to smooth the way towards greater trust between OIG and NSF management, both of whom I'm sure have the best interests of the scientific community and taxpayers in mind. Second, I want to highlight the very last section of the NAPA report entitled "The Cost of Increased Oversight." It would be irresponsible for us to ignore the reality that it will not be possible for NSF to implement NAPA's recommendations, let alone the IG's, without increased funding to support such oversight. I hope that the NSF requests enough funding in their budget to implement the NAPA recommendations. In addition, I hope that all my colleagues will join me this spring in urging our appropriators to fully fund the agency's request for its management account. With that, I thank the witnesses for being here this morning, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. And since this morning we had the National Prayer Breakfast, we have a number of our colleagues who are late or unavailable, so my apologies for first the delay on all of our parts, but that's what's going on. The traffic was pretty bad out there too, as you probably experienced. But now let me introduce our witnesses. Our first witness today is Ms. Cynthia Heckmann, Project Director of the National Academy of Public Administration's review on the NSF's use of cooperative agreements to support the development, construction, and operations of state-of-the-art, large-scale, multi-user research facilities. Prior to joining NAPA, Ms. Heckmann had an extensive career at the Government Accountability Office, as well as career experience in both the executive branch and in state government. Ms. Heckmann received her Master's of Public Administration from Northeastern University and her Bachelor of Arts from Simmons College. Our second witness today is Dr. Richard Buckius. Did I get that right? Dr. Buckius is the Chief Operating Officer for the National Science Foundation. He assumed the position of COO in October 2014, having previously been a Senior Policy Advisor for NSF. He is an author and co-author of numerous publications on the topics of radiation heat transfer, numerical fluid mechanics, and combustion. He received his bachelor's, master's, and PhD in mechanical engineering at the University of California, Berkeley. Our last witness today is Ms. Allison Lerner. Ms. Lerner is the Inspector General for the National Science Foundation. Before joining NSF in April 2009, Ms. Lerner served in many leadership positions at the Department of Commerce, including counsel to the Inspector General. She has received several national awards for excellence and was selected to be a member of the Government Accountability and Transparency Board by the President in June 2011. Ms. Lerner received her law and undergraduate degrees from the University of Texas. I now recognize Ms. Heckmann for 5 minutes to present her testimony.
Good morning, Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the invitation to discuss recommendations from the Academy's report on NSF's use of cooperative agreements to support the development, construction, and operations of state-of-the-art large-scale multi-user research facilities. The NSF Director and National Science Board jointly requested this review with a focus on the agency's largest cooperative agreements of $100 million or more under the MREFC account. The Academy's panel and study team's review focused on agency's policies and practices governing the life cycle of these projects, including issues raised by the Inspector General and congressional concerns. We also looked at comparator agencies with large capital investment projects most analogous to NSF's for promising practices that might be transferable. Overall, we found the cooperative agreements are the appropriate mechanism to support these efforts. We also acknowledged many recent efforts by NSF has undertaken to implement new policies and practices to address Inspector General and congressional concerns. Our recommendations are intended to support NSF and the board's commitment to improving core business practices and the agency's key performance goal of ensuring program integrity and responsible stewardship of major research facilities. We have included suggested implementation steps for each recommendation and, where appropriate in our text, highlighted other agencies' promising practices. Our recommendations provide a number of actions and options to strengthen oversight and enhance agency governance practices and processes. For today, we are grouping the recommendations as follows. 1, policies on cost estimating and cost analysis. NSF has strengthened its methodological approach to cost estimating and analysis and updated its policies in the Large Facilities Manual to reflect these efforts. This includes a tightened control environment and improved cost surveillance strategies. However, we identified some additional opportunities to bolster cost analysis requirements for award recipients and improve internal agency processes for detecting potential issues in proposals. In terms of cost estimating, we recommend that NSF change current language in the manual, making it clear that award recipients are expected, not just encouraged, to follow guidance in GAO's Cost Estimating and Assessment Guide and Schedule Assessment Guide when developing those costs and schedule estimates. In terms of cost analysis, we recommend that NSF require that decisions not to act on recommendations from the pre-award cost analyses conducted by their Cost Analysis and Audit Resolution branch be reviewed by the Large Facilities Office and forwarded to the Chief Financial Officer for a final determination. These decisions should be documented in writing and shared with the MREFC panel prior to the release of any award funds. 2, managing budgeting contingency. The use of contingency is a commonly accepted business and project management risk mitigation practice for construction projects. NSF's position is that contingency funds should be retained and managed by the award recipients. However, the common federal agency practice is for the agency to hold either all or a majority percentage of the contingency funds. By holding at least a percentage of these funds, NSF could further strengthen internal controls and accountability. Therefore, we recommend NSF adopt the practice of retaining control over a portion of the award recipients' contingency funds and distributing them with other incremental funds as needed. 3, management fee policies and processes. NSF includes management fee in several of its cooperative agreements to cover business expenses related to construction or operations that would otherwise be non-reimbursable under governing cost principles. However, most of the examples provided to us appear to be costs that would either be covered under indirect costs or contingency. Despite recent changes NSF has made in its policy to provide clearer guidance on appropriate and inappropriate uses of management fee, the IG continues to have concerns. Furthermore, OMB's efforts in the uniform guidance have not resulted in greater clarity on some of the most controversial aspects of management fee. We recommend NSF eliminate the practice of including management fee in cooperative agreements in future projects. 4, governing for effective stewardship. Governing bodies, agency internal coordinating committees, and advisory review panels play important roles in governance, development, and execution of MREFC projects. We've offered recommendations for each of these groups to address ambiguity and further build on the agency's capacity to effectively manage these projects. NSF and NSB roles and responsibilities, starting with them. The statutory joint leadership model of an appointed director and board is quite unique among federal agencies. The current working relationship appears to be working well, but it's not always been the case, and we've recommended that they establish and publish a joint duties and responsibilities document to institutionalize the role. The MREFC panel is only engaged right now in design review phases of an MREFC's project. For more consistent and informed oversight, the panel should be involved throughout the life cycle of a project's development and implementation, really reviewing project status on a set schedule. In terms of advisory committees and review panels, the panels need to include experts with requisite project and financial management knowledge and experience, and we are recommending that NSF explicitly identify the requirements and add them to the selection criteria for those external reviewers. We also recommend that NSF establish a FACA committee for the director to use as a sounding board. Large Facilities Office, the role and the placement of this office has been subject to debate. We concluded that the organizational placement is not as important as project management roles and responsibilities. Its current placement is also logical within the Office of the CFO, as it focuses on strengthening project management assistance. We did make recommendations in terms of hiring 2 additional FTEs and directing the MREFC charter be revised to change the status of the LFO head from non-voting to a full voting member. In terms of planning and portfolio management process, we have a recommendation in terms of the annual facilities plan where there's some confusion over what its role is, and ask that NSF evaluate it in terms of its agency's current planning and strategic planning processes. Finally, project management skills are needed for effective oversight. NSF has folks have strong science credentials, not as likely to have the same corollary skills and experience in project management. We have 3 recommendations for project management. First is to identify skill requirements for internal staff and develop corollary project management training for the staff. Second, to require award recipient project managers be certified in project management and specify minimum project experience requirement thresholds in the actual terms and conditions. And lastly, establish formal communities of practice to share best practices and lessons learned requirement for all MREC projects. In closing, let me just reiterate, NSF has undertaken a wide range of actions to improve the oversight of these MREFC projects. The efforts are a work in progress. They appear headed in the right direction, given the initiatives underway and the culture change needed to socialize these change. Time will be needed, and from a continuous improvement perspective, time will be needed to see what is working and what requires further adjustments. Thank you for the opportunity to share these views.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Heckmann. And now Dr. Buckius.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss NSF's oversight of major research facility infrastructure projects and NSF's response to the recent NAPA report. The National Science Foundation supports fundamental research in the frontiers of knowledge across all fields of science and engineering. As part of that mission, NSF supports a broad array of 28 major transformative research facilities that are geographically distributed observatories, telescopes, mobile platforms such as research vessels and aircraft. In a total, the operational cost of NSF's entire portfolio of research infrastructure requires approximately $1.2 billion per year. I'd like to start by thanking NAPA for its rigorous review of NSF's use of cooperative agreements to support large-scale investments in science and technology. The members of this committee, the Inspector General, and the experts at NAPA have all been exceptionally helpful to the Foundation in identifying areas where NSF can improve and make our oversight of critical facilities even stronger. We appreciate the panel's overall conclusion that cooperative agreements are the appropriate mechanism for the agency to use for construction and operations of large facilities. In using this funding mechanism, the Foundation is committed to improving the rigor and oversight of its processes and deploying appropriate levels of internal project, programmatic, financial management expertise. In order to respond to the report, the Director has created an implementation team to address each of the recommendations, and I'll divide this conversation into 2 broad areas. First, business practices, and second, oversight, accountability, and stewardship. Let me start by saying that NSF will implement all 13 recommendations in some form. In the case of the business practices, NSF will provide stronger requirements of cost estimating and adjudication of cost analysis findings as recommended by the panel, and will revamp the processes of obligating and allocating contingency based upon the project's level of risk. The panel's comparison with other agencies is extremely useful, and we will follow up with these agencies for more information detailing the process of partial withholding of contingency, while also ensuring NSF's continued compliance with uniform guidance. With regard to management fee, the Foundation is continuing to implement the stringent policy we put in place last year, and we are currently considering the alternatives set forth in the panel's report. As I previously testified before this committee, NSF acknowledges that some awardees should have shown better judgment in the use of their management fee, even if they were not in violation of any law or regulation governing the use of these funds. The Foundation has learned a number of lessons about management fees, and we have designed the policy around the lessons learned. While many of the panel's recommendations are implementable within a relatively short time, I would note that we believe the management fee topic will likely take a more thorough analysis on the part of NSF than some of the other recommendations. The panel's holistic view of NSF's oversight, accountability, and stewardship of large research facilities is welcomed by the Foundation. We are considering all the recommendations on the roles and responsibilities of the National Science Board, MREFC panel, and the Office of the Director as a single endeavor. We plan to enhance the role of independent expertise in project and financial management, as well as the cross-agency sharing of best practices. The National Science Board examined the panel's recommendations over the course of the last few days, and this is our first NSB meeting since the release of the report. We look forward to working together with the board to strengthen our oversight, accountability, and stewardship as recommended by the panel. NSF is committed to developing project management skills, experience, and training for both foundation staff and MREFC project managers. I'd like to clarify for the committee that any changes NSF undertakes can and will apply to existing, not just new, cooperative agreements. As the foundation improves its processes, we can revise, as appropriate, existing agreements to strengthen oversight. In closing, I'd like to reiterate how much NSF welcomes the NAPA report and its recommendations. It is only with strong support from the Inspector General, external experts like NAPA, and Congress that complete oversight of taxpayer resources can be achieved, and we appreciate all these efforts. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I will be pleased to answer any of your questions.
I now recognize Ms. Lerner for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Chairwoman, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss my office's views on the National Academy of Public Administration's report on NSF's use of cooperative agreements to support large-scale investment in research. Since 2010, my office has issued 28 reports containing more than 80 recommendations that relate to NSF's management of cooperative agreements for large facility projects. Beginning with our audits of over $1.1 billion in proposal costs for 3 construction projects, the issues we identified have occurred at multiple facilities and ultimately contributed to the decision to procure the NAPA report. I commend Drs. Cordova and David for their vision in commissioning this effort, as well as the NAPA panel and staff who conducted the review and prepared the outstanding final product. The report sets forth practical recommendations that, if implemented by the agency in a timely fashion, will significantly improve NSF's ability to ensure accountability over these high-risk, high-dollar projects, and thus go a long way toward addressing many of the issues my office has raised. Our office supports all of the NAPA report's recommendations, and I'll briefly discuss 6 of them. First, the report recommended that NSF require review of exceptions to recommendations from pre-award cost analyses conducted by the Foundation's in-house analysts, or CAR. Because our work has identified instances in which CAR's important concerns have not been addressed in a timely fashion, we share NAPA's belief that action is necessary to ensure that the critical issues CAR identifies are brought to the attention of senior officials and panels and resolved. A similar process should be followed for other important internal analyses and for the findings of the incurred cost audits NSF will soon be procuring. We wholeheartedly agree with NAPA's recommendation that NSF should retain control over a portion of awardees' contingency funds. Our previous audits have found that construction budgets for NSF's large facility projects contained tens of millions of dollars in unsupported contingency cost. The risk of misuse of these funds is heightened because NSF does not require awardees to track expenditure of funds in their accounting systems, which makes it all but impossible for us to audit these significant expenditures. With respect to the panel's recommendation to eliminate the use of management fee, our September 2015 alert memo documented positive steps NSF has taken to strengthen its fee policy and noted improvements that are needed to determine if management fee is necessary for an awardee's financial viability. If NSF decides to continue providing such fees, it should consider and address the issues noted in our alert memo. OIG also agrees with three recommendations that focus on the need for NSF to strengthen business and project management skills within the agency and at its awardees. The culture change needed to implement these recommendations is clearly warranted because, as the NEOM project has illustrated, deficiencies in a project's business processes have the potential to undermine its scientific goals if the project must be de-scoped due to cost or schedule overruns. Finally, I'd like to note 3 areas that were not covered by the NAPA recommendations, but which are still critical to NSF's ability to manage large facility projects. First, our recent work has found that NSF does not require the earned value management systems for its large facility projects to be certified or the data they contain to be verified. The poor quality of the information in these reports for the NEOM projects was one of the reasons why the cost overrun for that project was undetected for so long. NSF is currently evaluating what actions it should take to ensure the quality of EVM data. Second, our office has repeatedly recommended that NSF require annual incurred cost submissions for projects over $50 million. Such submissions provide critical information about how an awardee has spent federal funds and are essential tools for both NSF and the OIG. In 2 very recent reviews, however, auditors found the submissions for 2 large construction projects were not adequate to initiate an audit because so much important information was missing from them. NSF is currently seeking OMB clearance related to such submissions. Finally, many of our reports have stressed the need for annual incurred cost audits of large facility recipients. Such audits provide NSF with the best evidence of how awardees are actually expending federal funds. While we commend NSF for deciding to require incurred cost audits at project completion, by waiting until the end to obtain an audit, NSF will miss opportunities to identify and correct problematic expenditures in the project's early days. Given the level of risk we have identified with these projects, annual or at least biannual audits are clearly warranted. In closing, NSF's swift and decisive implementation of the NAPA report's recommendation will have a significant positive impact on the Foundation's ability to manage high-dollar, high-risk, large facility projects. I look forward to continuing to work with Congress, the Foundation, and the National Science Board toward this goal, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And I, excuse me, I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. I thank the witnesses. And I did want to let you know we got word that our colleagues are stuck on a bus trying to get back from the prayer breakfast. So again, our apologies for our other colleagues who aren't here this morning. I guess no good deed goes unpunished, right? Okay, Ms. Lerner, do you believe that the recommendations made by NAPA on how NSF should handle cost proposal analyses and audits goes far enough to fix cost problems that you have found in your audit work of large-scale projects? Oh, your microphone, please.
Thank you. We're pleased that NSF is committed to undertaking one of the 8 actions noted in GAO's cost estimating guide. We're concerned, however, that for the large, high-dollar, high-risk projects, that some of those options, and as GAO notes in the guide itself, are not rigorous enough to provide the information that's necessary. And we would recommend that for the high-dollar, high-risk construction projects, that either a pre-award audit be done or an independent cost estimate be obtained, and that some of the less rigorous options like a sufficiency review, which was used for the LSST project, not be pursued.
Thank you. And Ms. Heckmann, the IG testified that one issue the NAPA report did not make a recommendation on, but she considers critical, she was talking about in her testimony, is the use of an earned value management system for tracking and measuring project cost and schedule performance. The NAPA report did note the Department of Energy and NASA have well-developed EVM policies in place. Why did this study panel stop short of making a recommendation on using a certified EVM system for projects?
At the time of our review, we understood that the National Science Foundation was in the midst of reviewing its EVM policies and processes and working to standardize the processes and be sure to adopt the standards that are federal standards. What we did in terms of looking at other agencies' practices was point out the promising practices that we felt were transferable rather than really focusing a great deal of time on the EVM. It was clear to us that they were committed to using EVM. What we also felt was important was that their staff, again, getting back to the project management perspective, needed to understand what EVM really is and how to read EVM charts, et cetera, and how to really do the oversight that's necessary for EVM. So the bottom line there is that we saw it as kind of a work in progress, and we were not at a point to really make a recommendation further than we would really need to see what, in fact, they have done.
Okay, thank you. And Doctor, would you like to address that also?
Ms. Heckmann's exactly right. We are in the midst of evaluating all aspects of EVM. I'd go so far to say, though, that it's important, I think, to look at the validation. That certification is one aspect, and we're going to consider that, but the validation is the key because that's where you get the answers. And so, again, and I think the recommendation is well placed, and we're taking it very seriously.
All right, thank you. Ms. Lerner, did you want to add anything to that? Or okay. Thank you, and I will now yield to my colleague, Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you. As they sometimes say, you need to spend money to make money. You also have to spend some money in order to save money when we're talking about making some of these changes and having the proper oversight when it comes to MREFC. There are a lot of good recommendations in the NAPA report, and we know some of them will cost more than others to implement. And the Inspector General would like to see the NSF go much further on some fronts than NAPA recommended. So I just want to ask all three of you, given the cost of implementing some of the recommended reforms, how do you think NSF should prioritize the various recommendations and ensure that the enhanced oversight does not impede NSF's scientific mission? We sure would like to see them all done as quickly as possible, but we know that there's probably going to have to be some prioritization done in terms of which ones are done first. So, start with Ms. Heckmann.
Thank you. We think it's really critical that they develop the project management expertise internally to be able to really perform the stewardship responsibilities that are necessary. So in terms of the role of the LFO and what it is doing to ensure that there's consistency across the organization and the practices, as well as providing the support and the assurance that's necessary for stewardship, we feel that those are very critical. Obviously, in the area of contingency and management fees, I agree with Dr. Buckius, will take longer. It's a more complicated issue, and there's no great guidance out there that's really kind of sets the stage for where to go in the future. I mean, that will take some time. And in fact, we made a recommendation. We in the text of our report, we do cite that if there's some specific requirements that NSF projects have that do not really fit the current definitions, it may make sense to really identify those and seek special legislative authority there. Bottom line, in terms of balance, it is a balancing act. Budgets are tight. There's been a lot of initiatives underway. NSF will need to really step back and do detailed workload and workforce analyses to determine what the next steps are. But dealing with contingency issues, dealing with how they manage the MREFC panel, I think is one that's a very easy fix. Wouldn't require a lot of time, effort, or cost, and would really help them in terms of ensuring that they have processes in place as well for monitoring and really shoring up their oversight processes.
Okay, let me go to Ms. Lerner, and then we'll go to Dr. Buckius.
I certainly agree that there are the human capital investment that needs to be made in ensuring that NSF and its awardees have the necessary program management expertise is critical. In terms of financial investments, I do believe that investments in strong pre-award and post-award audits will pay dividends in the information that they provide NSF managers about how the funds are planned to be used and are actually being used. When you look at the cost of some of these projects, which are $350 to almost $500 million, investing a couple of $100,000 in an audit seems a very appropriate thing to do because, especially since it's one of the only ways NSF post-award can actually see how its funds are being used.
Thank you. Dr. Buckius.
Well, thank you for this question. It is a balance. So we've got 13 recommendations here. A number of them can be implemented with relatively low cost. Modifying text and ensuring that our awardees are responding, I think that I would argue that's moderate. Regarding the expertise, I think we've already made some steps in that direction by our most recent hires under the existing LFO allocation, large facility office, excuse me. We are allocating 2 more positions to that. It's already been done. They're going to be posted. Our attitude is, in the case of LFO, they've been understaffed I would argue, for a number of years. And so it's time for us to actually make that happen. This comes out of our AOAM Administration Operations account, and I think you'll read in the 16 and 17 budgets, it's a strained account already, but this is necessary. The comments on the MREFC are interesting because they also don't require a lot of cost from the point of view of people. They're going to require a lot of cost in terms of time, though. Because we now believe, and I think the NAPA report clearly showed, we need to do complete life cycle analysis. And we've been doing gate analysis, and we've been focusing on when things move from one gate to another. We need to ensure continuous oversight. So that'll be time. Time is money, and so that'll cost us in the long run, but I think it's absolutely necessary. So as you've noted, it's going to be a balance to ensure that we actually get the right oversight, right care, and obviously balance our budgets that we have to do. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Out of time, so I'll yield back.
We are short on members if you had something.
Well, let me very quickly, Dr. Buckius, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this 5 days before the budget request is released, but can we expect to see an increased request for the NSF management account in order to pay for some of this reform?
The request we got in front of you will help us a lot in order to make sure that we're making progress. I'm thinking long-term, 18, 19. I think that those are the areas that we're going to have to spend a lot more care regarding these kinds of people issues. 17 is on the mark.
Thank you. One other thing, if I could ask you, Dr. Buckius, I understand NSF is taking under consideration the NAPA recommendation to eliminate management fee and is initiating a evaluation of alternatives. Is there any kind of preview you can give us at this early date, or do you have any time frame in mind for concluding the analysis?
Sure. Let me. This is the issue that we talked about in my last testimony. So we implemented what I would call an extremely strict policy on management fees. We write or we ask now for the positive, that is, what are you going to do with it, and we also indicate what you can't do with it. We implemented this in June of 15. We're in the midst of now assessing what the impact has been by that strict policy. Our deadline there is May. We're going to work towards May in order to make the assessment of how that particular policy that was implemented in June has impacted the folks that actually are using it. The NAPA report also makes a number of recommendations, as you just heard from Ms. Heckmann. Some of those I think we really need to consider and see how we can actually use other mechanisms in order to be able to get these kinds of resources in the hands of the folks that we. So remember the whole goal here. The whole goal is to provide agencies, organizations, the opportunity to compete for these awards. We need competing proposals if we're going to fund these kinds of entities. And so the management fee permits them to do certain things that they need to do. So we need to assess, as the NAPA report has indicated, how we can what other mechanisms we can possibly use other than management fee. So our goal is to try to do that so we've got these two issues. Our goal is to try to do that over the next months. We have to work with our National Science Board, though, to ensure that they're on board.
Very good. Thank you. I yield back again.
Okay. And I now recognize Mrs. Bonamici.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to start, even though Chairman Smith isn't here yet, just wanted to start by thanking him on the record for organizing a trip with Dr. Cordova a little more than a year ago to Antarctica and with some of the NSF staff and Dr. Cordova. And I come to this discussion with that background because of going on that trip, which was really an enlightening experience and fascinating, understanding not only the importance of NSF investments and facilities, but also the challenges. And if you want to go to a place where there are challenges with NSF facilities, it's a place like Antarctica. So that brought to the other committee members who went on that trip, I think, a perspective of appreciation of some of the challenges, but also the importance. So Ms. Heckmann described in her testimony, NSF will need to make some hard funding decisions that address the demand for more rigorous accountability systems balanced against the mission to advance science. Now, obviously, there are many good recommendations in the NAPA report, and some will cost more than others to implement, as we've heard. And the IG would like to see NSF go farther in some areas than NAPA recommends. I don't think anyone would argue that it's important to have appropriate oversight, but obviously there need to be priorities set. So I want to ask you, Dr. Buckius, to Are we saying your name right? Close.
You can't call me Richard. It's Buckius.
Buckius, thank you. To expand a little bit, we've had some discussion about this already, but given the cost of implementing some of the recommended reforms, how should NSF go through the prioritization process of all the various recommendations, while you're also trying to ensure that the enhanced oversight does not impede NSF scientific missions? So could you talk a little bit about that process and how you're making the decisions, the priority decisions?
Yeah, so let me try. First of all, your trip to Antarctica probably demonstrated a lot of the facility issues that we deal with
Right.
on a regular basis. I mean, that particular facility has almost everything exaggerated from the point of view of difficulties.
Right.
And yet the science that we're doing there and the leadership for this country in Antarctica is tremendous. So our approach has been, on a number of these audit recommendations, is to look at the risk and try to balance the audits related to risk so that we aren't going in and proposing to audit, say, incurred cost audits on every single proposal. I mean, that just isn't, it won't ever happen. It's impossible. So what we do is we try to assess the level of risk in a project, and then we try to look at those that have the largest dollar value. So we've set limits in the case of incurred costs at $100 million, and then assess the risk of those, and then go and take a look at what we need to do. We propose to do them at the end of the award. If necessary, though, if we see a risk issue, we can jump in and audit those earlier. So that's the approach we want to take, so that we don't burden ourselves overly with an audit process that might not give us the necessary information that we need. So remember, though, we are, say in the comment that Ms. Lerner made regarding EVM, we annually look at this. Okay, we look at it monthly. So it's not like we're not paying attention to it. Her recommendation, which is the one we have to look at on certification validation, we probably can do some better in the validation set. And so that's kind of our goal. Our goal is to try to go in and look at the most risky issues, try to look at the biggest projects, and invest in those areas. So that's our objective.
Thank you. And can you also expand a little bit on the timeline and that process of developing the comprehensive organizational chart to incorporate the recommendations? And you mentioned LFO and additional investment needed there, but what is the process of going through that timeline? Give us a little more details about that, and what, if any, outside expertise will help you through this process of the timeline and developing the recommendations.
I would argue we meet on this subject every week as a group with the director, maybe every other week, depending upon travel. So this is an urgent issue. We are going to implement as many of these recommendations as we can, as soon as we can. Now, let's talk a little bit about the FACA committee. We think that's an excellent recommendation. We are trying to figure out how to do that in a stepwise process. So we're at this point talking about trying to use a subcommittee of one of our current ACs so that we can get that moving ASAP, with the idea in the long run of creating a separate committee. So again, the idea, we want to implement these as fast as we possibly can, because we realize this is going to be helpful to all of us. At the same time, in order to set up a FACA committee, it takes a fair amount of work, okay, in order to be able to get that all constructed. And so we want to do that, but we've got to figure out ways to get there first. The LFO issue, Matt Hawkins is our LFO head, and I'm sure he would tell you the same thing. We were understaffed, I would argue, 3-4 years ago in that area, okay? And so like you've heard, I was here in the last year and a half or so, and we're staffing that up, okay? It has to be a priority, and so we're going to do it. And so like I said, we've already got 2 more postings coming out in that. These are the kind of investments that the agency has to make. The cost is one thing, implementation is as fast as we can. Now, the management fee is the one that's probably going to be the slowest, because we've got to take a look at how we're going to ensure that we have competitors. And we just don't want to have some unintended consequences by implementation of a policy that would actually alienate or give us the inability to have proposers in these areas.
Terrific. Well, thank you. And I see that I'm out of time, but I just want to say that we appreciate the progress made to date, and appreciate you, the directors, and your willingness to come back and report to us. So thank you. Yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I'm just going to ask an additional question. Ms. Lerner, in Dr. Buckius' testimony, he notes that NSF manages 28 major research facilities and that NEON is only one facility within this portfolio that NSF needs to consider when looking at its policies and procedures related to proper oversight. This implies that many of the oversight management issues identified are isolated to NEON. In your audits and reviews of all the major research facilities in NSF's portfolio, have you found similar issues in the oversight and management of other projects?
As I noted at the start of my remarks, we've done 28 reports with 80 recommendations, and those findings are not limited to NEON. We've also found issues and concerns at the LSST project, at the DKIST project, when it was called ATST, and with the OOI project, and most recently with incurred cost submissions for the AUI project. So this is the issues and the challenges that we've identified are not limited.
Okay. Okay, well, the bus apparently is still en route. So again, my apologies. And I think if my colleagues have any additional questions, be happy to yield to them. But we will keep the record open for additional questions. I appreciate your testimony here this morning and helping us in moving forward on these issues. And we look forward to continuing to work with you. And the record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional written comments and written questions from our members who both are here and those who weren't able to join us. So thank you, and the meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.